Hello, and welcome back to Grave Whispers. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading every single one. If you enjoy whispers rising straight from the grave, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, get comfortable. Dim the lights if you dare. Relax your mind. Let the outside world fade away. And let's begin. Story 1, it started with a slow dripping sound from my ceiling. At first, it was so light that I barely noticed it. I will admit, I am not the most careful person when it comes to small things around the house. I can walk past the problem for days before my brain finally decides to see it. So in the beginning, I ignored it, without even knowing I was ignoring it. Then one afternoon, I walked across the living room barefoot and felt something cold and wet under my toes. I stopped right away. The carpet was damp. For a few seconds, I just stood there, looking down at my feet, trying to understand why the floor felt like that. Then another drop fell from above and landed somewhere nearby with a soft, heavy tap. That was when I finally looked up and saw the stain on the ceiling. It was ugly and brown around the edges, spreading slowly like a bruise. The center of it was darker, almost black, and the ceiling around it looked soft, like wet paper. My first thought was a leaking pipe. It had to be. What else could it be? It was the middle of summer. It had not rained for weeks. The sky had been clear every day, and the heat outside had been dry enough to crack the dirt around the house. There was no reason for water to be coming through my ceiling unless something inside the walls had broken. I had only moved into the house a month earlier. It belonged to my aunt before she died, and after everything was settled, it came to me. I know it sounds cold, but her death gave me something I had never really had before, a little financial stability. Not comfort exactly, but enough space to breathe, enough to stop worrying about rent for the first time in years. The house itself was not perfect. In fact, it was far from it. It looked like no one had properly cared for it in a long time. The paint was faded. The gutters sagged. The porch boards creaked under your feet. Bushes and weeds had grown wild around the place, almost like the land was trying to pull the house back into the ground. But it was free, and it had a view that made every problem seem smaller, at least for a while. The lake sat just beyond the trees, close enough that on quiet mornings I could hear the water moving against the shore. From the front windows, you could see the light shifting over the surface. In the evenings, the whole lake turned orange and gold. It was the kind of view people pay too much money for. I had gotten it because my aunt had died alone in a house no one else wanted. That thought made me feel guilty sometimes. Still, a leaking ceiling was not something I could ignore. I needed tools, and that meant opening the old shed for the first time since moving in. The shed stood behind the house, half hidden behind weeds and overgrown grass. The door was almost sealed shut by vines and dirt. I had to tear away handfuls of dry, thorny plants just to reach the handle. When I finally pulled the door open, it made a long, angry sound, like something waking up after years of sleep. Inside, the air smelled of dust, old wood, and damp clay. The shed was lined with shelves. Most of them were filled with unfinished pottery, broken sculptures, dried paintbrushes, jars, rags, and small art projects my aunt must have started and abandoned. Some of the pottery pieces were beautiful, even half finished. Others looked strange, like they had been shaped in a hurry and then left behind before they could become anything. Seeing all of it made me sad in a way I did not expect. My aunt had been an artist for as long as I could remember. She was the kind of woman who wore bright scarves, painted furniture in ridiculous colors, and laughed too loudly in restaurants. Whenever she came to family gatherings, she brought little handmade gifts no one knew what to do with. Painted stones, clay animals, bowls that leaned to one side. Her house had always been packed with color, even when the rest of her life was falling apart. Now, all her work sat in the shed, forgotten and covered in dust. I searched through the shelves until I found a neglected corner where she had kept her tools. There was an old toolbox, a ladder, and a heavy-duty flashlight. I picked up the flashlight and tested it. Somehow, it still had some battery left. The light flickered once, then held steady. As I turned to leave, my hip knocked into a pile of canvases leaning against the wall. They slipped and fell across the floor. I cursed under my breath and bent down to pick them up. At first, I thought they were just black paintings. Almost every canvas was covered in thick black paint, with 2 small white dots near the center. The dots were uneven, like eyes drawn by someone with shaking hands. That alone was strange. My aunt had never been the kind of artist who painted in dark colors. Her work had always been bright and loud. She loved reds, yellows, oranges, pinks, and deep blues. She painted flowers too large to be real, and skies that looked like candy. Even when her work was bad, it was full of life. These canvases were nothing like that. I picked one up and wiped some dust away with my sleeve. Under the black paint, I could see the shape of something. At first, it was hard to tell what it was. Then I checked another canvas, and another. Slowly, the same object became clear in every painting. A white bathtub. A simple porcelain bathtub, painted again and again. In some of the earlier paintings, the tub was almost clean and carefully shaped. In later ones, she seemed to stop caring about the details. The brushstrokes became messy and rushed. The water inside the tub was painted darker each time, until the whole canvas was almost nothing but black. The 2 white dots I had noticed were not random at all. They were reflections on the surface of the water, or maybe eyes. I could not decide which answer made me feel worse. I stood there for a while, staring down at the paintings. Maybe my aunt had changed near the end. I had not seen much of her during her final months. The family said she became quiet and distant after she got sick. I had imagined her weak, but still cheerful, still the colorful woman I remembered. But these paintings made me wonder if something else had been happening in that house before she died. I put the canvases back as neatly as I could, took the ladder and flashlight, and went inside. The leak seemed to be coming from above the spare room beside the living room. There was a trapdoor in the ceiling there, one I had noticed before but never opened. The room itself had always felt odd to me. My aunt's house was full of things. Every other room had some strange collection in it. Some little statue from a trip overseas, some painted bowl, some old photograph, some bright rug or hanging ornament. But this room was empty. No bed, no shelves, no boxes, not even a chair. It was just bare walls, a clean floor, and a window with a perfect view of the lake and the parkland beyond it. I had wondered why she never used it as a studio. She had done most of her painting in the kitchen, judging by the stains I found on the counters and floor. But this room would have been perfect for art. The light came in softly during the afternoon, and at sunset the whole room filled with warmth. Even someone with almost no creativity, like me, could feel inspired standing there. I set up the ladder under the trapdoor and climbed up. When I pushed on the panel, it did not open easily. Something sticky held it in place around the edges. It pulled apart with a wet tearing sound, like dried glue being ripped loose. Then the trapdoor shifted, and water poured down onto me. It splashed over my face, shirt, and shoulders. I nearly fell off the ladder. The water was cold and smelled wrong, not like dirty rainwater or old pipes. It smelled stale and rotten, like something left in a drain for far too long. I wiped my face and shone the flashlight into the opening. I expected a cramped roof space full of insulation and dust. Instead, I saw a large attic. That surprised me. In America, attics are common, sure, but here in Australia, you do not see them as often, especially not in old houses like this. This space was wide enough that I could stand upright once I climbed inside. The air was warm, heavy, and wet, like a bathroom after someone had taken a long shower with no fan on. The wooden boards under my feet felt soft in places. Water had been sitting up there for a while. Then I saw it. In the center of the attic was the bathtub from the paintings. It was white porcelain, old but clean looking, and it sat there as if it belonged in a normal bathroom instead of in the roof of a house. It looked completely out of place. There were no pipes connected to it, no tap, no drain that I could see, no reason for it to be there at all. And it was full. The water inside reached the very top edge of the tub. It was black, thick-looking, and still. Not brown like mud, not green like lake water. Black. The kind of black that looks deeper than it should. For a long moment, I did not move. My mind tried to find a normal explanation because that is what minds do when they are scared. I told myself rainwater must have leaked through the roof and collected in the tub. Maybe my aunt had put it there as part of some art project. She had talked once about wanting to try sculpture or performance art. Maybe this strange bathtub had been her last unfinished idea before she got sick. But that did not explain how it got up there. The trapdoor was the only entrance I could see, and it was barely big enough for me to squeeze through. I am not a small man. I am built more like a refrigerator than a gymnast. But even if someone thinner had tried to carry the tub up through that opening, it would not have fit. There was no way. I walked closer, careful with each step. The boards creaked beneath me. When I looked under the bathtub, I saw where water had been dripping down. The wood around it was dark and rotten. That had to be the source of the leak. I went downstairs, gathered every bucket I could find, then came back up and started emptying the tub. The water was heavy and foul. Every bucket I filled smelled worse than the last. It clung to the plastic sides like oil. I dumped the water outside, came back, filled another bucket, and repeated the process again and again. After 7 full buckets, I stopped. The water level had not changed, not even a little. I stared at the tub, breathing hard, sweat running down my neck. It was impossible. I had taken out so much water that the level should have dropped by several inches at least. But the black surface still sat right at the rim, smooth and calm, as if I had done nothing at all. I tried again, this time watching carefully. I filled a bucket, turned away just long enough to set it down, and when I looked back, the water was full again. That was when I decided I was not the right person to deal with it. I called a plumber. The local plumber's name was Laura. Over the phone, she asked me what the problem was. I told her my bathtub was leaking and I did not know where the water was coming from. I did not mention that the bathtub was in my attic. I did not mention the black water. I did not mention the paintings. She arrived the next day in a white van with faded writing on the side. She was practical, short, strong-looking, and clearly not someone who liked having her time wasted. "So where's the bathroom?" she asked as she stepped inside. "Let me show you the leak first," I said. I took her into the living room. The stain on the ceiling had grown much larger overnight. It had spread into an uneven dark patch, and the carpet beneath it was now soaked. The whole room smelled like something dead in summer heat. Laura looked up, then down at the wet floor, and started writing in a small notepad. "I thought you said your bathtub was leaking," she said. "It is." She looked at me. I took her into the spare room and pointed at the ladder under the trapdoor. She stared at it for a second. Then she stared at me. "You're joking. I wish I was. You want me to climb into your ceiling? I think it's better if you see it." "No, absolutely not." I could not really blame her. From her point of view, I was an unshaven, messy man in an old house in the middle of nowhere, asking her to climb into my roof space. I would not have trusted me either. "Look," I said, holding up my phone. "You don't have to go up." I took a photo. I showed her the picture of the bathtub. She looked at it for a few seconds, then said, "Bullshit." I explained that I had only just moved in, that the house had belonged to my aunt, and that my aunt had been a strange artist who sometimes did strange things. I told her I had no idea how the tub got up there. To my surprise, Laura did not leave. She took the flashlight from my hand, climbed 3 steps up the ladder, and raised her head just high enough to look through the trapdoor. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she lowered herself back down slowly. "What the hell?" she said. "This is a setup, isn't it? I'm not ending up in some stupid YouTube prank video, am I?" "No, you see the buckets up there?" I asked. "Yeah, I tried emptying it. It keeps filling back up. I don't know where the water is coming from." Laura looked at me like she was trying to decide if I was crazy, dangerous, or both. "Let me get some tools from my van," she said. "I'll be back." She left. I waited in the spare room for nearly half an hour. At some point, I became sure she had driven away and left me there with my impossible bathtub. I would not have blamed her for that either. But then she came back. "Sorry," she said, stepping through the front door with a toolbox in hand. "I called someone else to come take a look too." "Yeah," I said. "Sure, no worries." We climbed into the attic together. I held the flashlight while she worked. She started emptying the tub with a fresh set of buckets. This time, I kept my eyes locked on the water level. I forced myself not to look away. I blinked only when Laura was turned toward the tub, as if my attention alone could stop it from refilling. Strangely, it seemed to work. The water level slowly went down. When it was low enough for Laura to reach inside, she pulled on a glove and dipped her arm into the black water. A few seconds passed. "That's weird," she said. "What?" I asked. "Can't you find the plug?" She moved her arm around deeper, her face tightening. "I can't find the bottom." I laughed once, but it came out wrong. "What do you mean you can't find the bottom?" Laura pulled her arm out. Black water dripped from her glove. She removed it, wiped her hand on a rag, and took a tape measure from her toolbox. She pushed the metal tape down into the water. 30 centimeters. 1 meter. 2 meters. 3. The tape kept going. My mouth went dry. The bathtub was not deep enough for that. It looked like a normal tub. It should have had a bottom less than a meter down. But the tape kept sliding into the black water, clicking and whispering as it went. At 7 meters, it finally hit something. Laura froze. "What is it?" I asked. Before she could answer, the end of the tape jerked forward. The whole tape measure spun in her hand with a sharp, angry hiss. It moved like a fishing line when something strong pulls from below. Laura tried to hold on, but whatever had grabbed it was stronger. The tape snapped tight. Then the entire thing was ripped from her hands and vanished into the black water. Laura stumbled backward and nearly fell. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she started packing her tools. "No," she said. "Absolutely not. You need a priest or a scientist or someone who gets paid more than me. This is your problem, not mine." "What am I supposed to do?" I asked. Before she could answer, my doorbell buzzed downstairs. It was a weak, dying sound, like even the bell had lost the will to live. "That'll be Owen," Laura said. "He might know someone." I went downstairs while Laura stayed in the attic gathering her things. I expected Owen to be another plumber, maybe an older man in overalls or someone with decades of experience. Instead, when I opened the door, there was a tall, lanky young man standing there. He wore casual clothes and had tattoos crawling up his arms. His ears and face had several piercings, and he was looking down at his phone with one earbud in. "Sup," he said, pulling one earbud out and putting it in his shirt pocket. The music was still loud enough that I could hear it clearly. It was Katy Perry. "Owen?" I asked. "Yeah, man," he walked inside without waiting for me to invite him in, his eyes still on his screen. "So you're another plumber?" I asked. "No," he said. "Why would you think that?" I stared at him. "She's in the ceiling, yeah?" he asked. "Yeah, she's packing her things." Owen walked to the spare room and stood at the bottom of the ladder. "Hey, Laura," he called. No answer. He looked up toward the trapdoor. Laura. Still nothing. For the first time since he arrived, Owen looked away from his phone. He stared into the dark opening above the ladder. Then he turned to me. "Listen," he said. "People know we came here. They're expecting us back. Also, I'm a black belt in Muay Thai, so you better not be some freak plumber killer." "You said you're not even a plumber," I said, "and I haven't seen her come down. You saw her van outside." Owen switched on his phone flashlight and started climbing the ladder. Before he reached the top, Laura's pen and notepad dropped from the trapdoor. They hit the floor between us. Owen stopped. "Laura?" he called. "This isn't funny, you idiot." He climbed faster. I picked up the notepad and followed him. When I pulled myself into the attic, Owen was standing completely still. One of his earbuds had fallen to the floor. At first, I could not see what he was looking at. Then I raised the flashlight. Laura was sitting in the bathtub. She was covered from head to toe in a thick black substance, like tar mixed with water. It coated her hair, her face, her clothes, her arms. The only part of her that was not black was her teeth. They shone white in the beam of the flashlight as she smiled at us. It was not a normal smile. It was too wide, too still. "Laura?" Owen said, his voice breaking. The next second, something pulled her under. She did not scream. She did not fight. She just vanished beneath the black surface with a violent splash, dragged down by something we could not see. Owen and I ran to the tub. We both reached into the water, grabbing at nothing. "Laura." Owen screamed. "Laura." His hands splashed through the black water. his face twisted in panic. He looked at me. "Where did she go? Help me tip it over," I shouted. We grabbed one side of the tub and pushed. It was heavy, too heavy. Neither Owen nor I had much strength, but fear made us work harder than we should have been able to. The tub rocked once, then twice, then finally tipped onto its side. Black water poured across the attic floor. It spread fast, thick and oily, carrying Laura's tools with it. A wrench slid past my shoe. A screwdriver spun in the dark water. The smell hit me so hard I gagged. But when we looked into the overturned tub, the water did not stop. An endless stream kept pouring out from inside it. The tub was not empty. It was not even a tub anymore, not from that angle. It looked like a tunnel. A deep, black tunnel stretching downward into a darkness that did not belong inside any house. I shone the flashlight into it. The light disappeared before it reached the end. Owen grabbed my shirt with both hands. "Where the hell did she go?" he shouted. The attic floor creaked beneath us. Water now covered the boards. It was already almost an inch deep, and more kept spilling from the bathtub. I shoved Owen's hands off me. "We have to tip it back," I said. "What? We have to put the tub upright again." "Are you insane? Just help me." The water was rising quickly now. It reached our ankles. The whole ceiling groaned below us. I imagined the floor giving out and both of us crashing down into the house, followed by the bathtub, followed by whatever darkness lived inside it. Together, we pushed the tub back upright. The moment it settled, the water on the floor began to drain. Not through the floorboards, not into cracks. It flowed back toward the bathtub as if the tub was pulling it in. Owen and I both turned away from it and stared toward the trapdoor, like two children refusing to look at the monster in the room. We watched the water drain around our shoes until the floor was almost dry again. Then we heard gentle splashing behind us. That was our signal to turn. Something floated on the surface of the black water. At first, I thought it was a fish head. Then I saw the eyes. It was large and pale and wrong. It looked like a leech had tried to become a fish and failed. Its skin was slick and dark around the sides, but its eyes were swollen and white, bulging from its head. They stared at us without blinking. Owen made a sound like he was choking. The thing's mouth opened slowly. Its lower jaw rested just under the water's surface. Then two small, twisted limbs rose from the water and gripped the edge of the tub. They were not fins. Not really. They looked more like tiny deformed arms. It pulled itself slightly higher. Owen grabbed a wrench from the floor. "No," I said. He did not listen. He ran toward the tub. I reached for his jacket, but my fingers were wet and it slipped from my grip. The floor groaned under him. Then it broke. 1 second, he was there. The next, he was gone. There was a loud crash below, but no long scream. No cry for help. Just a hard impact, and then a horrible silence. I crawled to the broken hole and looked down. Owen lay on the kitchen floor below. His body had struck the countertop on the way down. His back was bent at an angle no living body should make. He was still breathing, but only barely. Short, wet gasps left his mouth. Then he stopped moving. I looked back at the bathtub. The fish creature had moved closer to the edge. Its mouth hung open. One twisted arm was now over the side, touching the attic floor. It looked ready to climb out. I began backing away toward the trapdoor, never taking my eyes off it. That was when my heel hit something. Laura's notepad. I looked down, for only a second. When I looked back, water was overflowing from the tub again. The creature leaned farther over the edge, watching me. Its white eyes followed every movement I made. I do not know why I picked up the notepad. Maybe I wanted to leave a warning. If I was going to die in that attic, then at least I could leave something for the next person. Something that said, do not open this trapdoor. Do not touch the bathtub. Do not look into the water. But when I picked up the pen and paper, the creature stopped moving. It sank lower. Only its eyes remained above the water. It was watching the notepad. No, it was afraid of it. My hand began to shake. I put the pen to the paper. The creature released a sound that I will never forget. It was a hiss and a scream at the same time, muffled as if it came from under miles of water. It filled the attic and made the boards vibrate beneath me. Still, I drew. I am not an artist. I never have been. My hands are too clumsy, and I cannot make anything look the way it does in my head. But in that moment, I felt pushed to draw, not inspired, not creative. Compelled, I drew the bathtub first. Then I drew the black water. Then I drew the creature inside it. The more detail I added, the farther it retreated. Its arms slipped back beneath the surface. Its mouth closed. Its white eyes lowered inch by inch. As I drew, the water level in the tub began to fall. I kept going. My drawing was terrible. It looked like something a 5-year-old might make during a nightmare. The bathtub was crooked. The creature looked more like a worm with eyes than whatever it truly was, but it was enough. The water kept dropping. Soon the creature was gone. Then the black water vanished too. For the first time since I had found it, the bathtub was empty. The inside was clean white porcelain, shining softly in the flashlight beam. No stain, no slime, no sign that it had ever been full of anything at all. I sat there for hours. I did not move from the attic. I watched the tub. I looked at my drawing. Then back at the tub. Then back at the drawing. Every small sound made me tense. Every creak of wood made my heart pound. But the water did not return. Not that night. Eventually, I climbed down through the trapdoor with Laura's notepad still in my hand. My clothes were wet. My hands smelled like the black water. My mind kept showing me Laura's smile and Owen's broken body. When I reached the spare room, the sun was setting outside the window. Warm orange light filled the empty room. It spread across the floor, touched the walls, and turned the lake beyond the trees into a sheet of fire. For a few seconds, despite everything, I understood why my aunt had kept the room empty. The view was beautiful, almost peaceful. But then I thought about the paintings in the shed. So many paintings, so many versions of the same bathtub. Some careful, some rushed, some almost completely black. My aunt had not been painting it because she was obsessed with a strange art project. She had been keeping it empty. Again and again, she had been drawing whatever lived inside that tub and forcing it back down. I looked at the notepad in my hand. My drawing was already damp around the edges. Somewhere above me, hidden behind the trapdoor, the house gave a soft creak. I knew then that this would not be the last time I climbed into the attic. And I knew that someday, maybe soon, I would run out of paper. Story 2. I have always been the kind of person who rolls his eyes at ghost stories. I never like to admit that anything strange could have a strange reason behind it. When people talked about haunted houses, shadow figures, footsteps in empty rooms, or objects moving on their own, I usually had some normal answer ready in my head before they even finished the story. A house makes a sound in the middle of the night. It is probably just the pipes. A door closes by itself. A draft came through a window. Something falls off a shelf. Maybe it was already balanced badly. A person feels like someone is watching them. They are probably tired, stressed, or letting their imagination run wild. That was always how I thought. I watched ghost hunting shows sometimes, but only because I found them funny. I never watched them because I believed in them. I would sit there and laugh when the people on screen whispered into the darkness, asking if any spirits were with them. Then the camera would catch some little noise, and everyone would jump like they had just seen the devil himself standing in the room. I always thought it was ridiculous. To me, the world was simple. Houses were made of wood, brick, pipes, wires, and old nails. They creaked. They settled. They made sounds when the weather changed. Nothing more. At least, that was what I believed before tonight. Now I am sitting outside my own house, on the cold front steps, typing this on my phone with my hands still shaking. I do not want to go back in. I keep looking over my shoulder at the windows, even though every curtain is still and every room looks dark from the outside. I know how stupid that sounds. I know I probably sound like one of those people I used to laugh at. But after what happened this evening, I honestly do not think I will ever sleep with the lights off again. It started around 7 o'clock. It was already dark outside, the kind of early evening darkness that makes the windows turn into black mirrors. You can still see the room behind you reflected in the glass, but you cannot really see anything outside anymore. The house was quiet in that normal evening way. Not peaceful exactly, but still. The heating kicked on every now and then. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Somewhere in the walls, old pipes clicked and settled. Nothing felt wrong at first. I was in my bedroom, sitting at my desk, playing a game on my computer. I had my headphones on, so I was not really listening to anything else in the house. The sound from the game was loud enough to block out most of the little noises around me. I was focused, leaned forward in my chair, one hand on the mouse and the other on the keyboard. I remember being annoyed about something happening in the game, so my mind was completely somewhere else. That is probably why the first sound caught me so hard. From somewhere downstairs in the kitchen, there was a heavy thud. It was not a soft sound. It was not like something small falling from a counter. It sounded big, solid, and flat, like a large picture frame had just slipped from the wall and hit the floor. The sound cut through my headphones clearly enough that I actually froze for a second. At first, I just sat there, listening. The game kept going in my ears, but I was no longer paying attention. I slowly took off my headphones and let them rest around my neck. The room suddenly felt too quiet without them. I stared at my closed bedroom door and waited for another sound. Nothing came. My first reaction was not fear. It was irritation. I gave one of those tired little sighs people make when they know they have to get up and deal with something. I figured something in the kitchen had fallen. Maybe the vibration from the washing machine had shifted something. Maybe a frame had been hanging loose for a while. Maybe a stack of dishes or a cutting board had tipped over. I did not believe anything strange had happened. Not then. I leaned back in my chair and rubbed my eyes. I was deciding whether I should go check the kitchen right away or finish the round I was in. I remember thinking that if something broke, it was already broken, so there was no real rush. That sounds careless, but that was honestly where my mind was. Then, my bedroom light turned on. Not the lamp on my desk, not my monitor getting brighter, not some flash from outside. The main ceiling light clicked on. The room filled with yellow light in a sudden, sharp way, and I looked up from my desk so fast that my neck actually hurt. For half a second, my brain tried to make sense of it in the normal way. Maybe there had been a power flicker. Maybe the bulb had done something strange. Maybe the switch had not been fully off. But then I looked at the switch beside my door. I saw it move. I watched the plastic toggle shift upward with my own eyes. It clicked into place like someone had placed a finger under it and pushed it up. The sound was small, but in that room it felt louder than the thud from the kitchen. There was no one near it. There was no one else in my bedroom. The door was closed. I was sitting at my desk across the room. I had not touched the switch. Nothing had hit it. There was no string attached to it, no loose wire hanging, no reason for it to move. It was just the switch. The same plain plastic switch I had used thousands of times before. And I watched it turn itself on. For a few seconds, I did not move at all. I just stared at the switch. My mind went completely blank, like it had hit a wall. I could feel my heartbeat picking up, but I still tried to explain it away. I tried so hard. Maybe the switch was faulty. Maybe the wiring was bad. Maybe the plastic toggle had been loose and popped up on its own. But even while I was thinking those things, another part of me knew I did not believe them. I had seen the movement. It had not popped. It had not slipped. It had moved with purpose. Then, the air changed. I do not know how else to explain it. The room did not get colder exactly, though I did feel a chill move across my skin. It was more like the air became heavier. It felt thick, like the space around me had suddenly filled with pressure. Breathing felt different. The room felt smaller. The light from the ceiling looked too bright. But the corners of the room still seemed wrong somehow, as if the light could not reach them the way it should. Then came that feeling. Most people know it. It is that sudden prickle on the back of your neck when you feel like someone is looking at you. You can be in a store, at work, or walking down the street, and all at once your body notices something before your mind does. You turn, and someone is staring. This was like that, but much worse. It was not just a small feeling of being watched. It felt like the entire house had turned its attention toward me at once. Like every wall, every corner, every dark space under every piece of furniture had become aware of me. It felt like I was no longer alone in my own room, even though I could not see anyone. My skin tightened. Every hair on my arm stood up. My stomach dropped. My hands went cold on the desk. Something deep inside me, something older than thought, started screaming that I needed to get out. Not check the kitchen. Not call out. Not be brave. Just get out. I turned my chair a little toward the door, still staring at the light switch. I think I was waiting for it to move again. I do not know why. Maybe part of me needed proof that I had not imagined it. Maybe part of me was too scared to look anywhere else. Then I heard the footsteps. They came from above me. Directly above my bedroom is the attic. It is not a finished room. It is just an old, dusty attic space with insulation, wooden beams, stored boxes, and a few things that have been up there for years. I know the sounds that come from it. I have heard squirrels on the roof. I have heard mice or rats moving around inside the walls. I have heard little scratching noises and quick scuttling at night. I know the difference between a small animal and something heavy. This was not an animal. The first step was slow and deep. It made the ceiling give a faint wooden groan. Then there was a pause. Then another step. The sound was heavy, careful, and deliberate. It was not fast like a rodent. It was not random. It was not the light tapping of branches against the roof. It was the sound of weight moving across old boards. Step, pause. Each one seemed closer than the last. I sat frozen in my chair, listening as the footsteps moved across the attic. They were not moving quickly. That made it worse. Whoever or whatever was up there was not running. It was not panicked. It was not trying to hide. It was walking. Slowly toward the part of the attic directly above my room. I looked up at the ceiling. The light from the ceiling fixtures shone around the room like everything was normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. The footsteps continued, dragging across the space above me with that terrible, steady rhythm. Step, pause. I could almost picture it up there. Something standing bent under the low attic roof, moving between the boxes and beams, placing one foot down with care before lifting the other. Something that knew exactly where I was sitting. Something that had turned on my light so I would know it was there. That thought hit me so hard that I nearly stopped breathing. The thud in the kitchen had pulled my attention. The light had made sure I noticed. And now the footsteps were coming toward me. I know that sounds insane, but in that moment, it felt coordinated. It felt like the house or something inside it had decided to focus on me. Everything had happened in order. First, the sound downstairs. Then the light in my room. Then the footsteps above me. It was like something was closing in from all sides, guiding my fear exactly where it wanted it. I wanted to stand up, but my legs would not move at first. My whole body felt locked in place. My mind kept trying to return to normal explanations, but they were falling apart one by one. A picture frame fell. The switch moved. Something heavy was walking in the attic. Those were the facts, and I hated them. The footsteps reached the section right above my bedroom ceiling and stopped. That was worse than the walking. The silence after those steps felt alive. I stared at the ceiling, waiting. I expected another step, or scratching, or a knock, or maybe a voice. But nothing came. The pressure in the room felt stronger. My ears were ringing. I could hear my own breathing now, shallow and uneven. Then there was a faint creak above me. Not a step this time. More like someone shifting their weight. Like something had stopped walking and was now standing directly over me. That broke whatever hold the fear had on my body. I stood up so fast, my chair rolled back and hit the wall. The sound made me jump. I grabbed my phone from the desk, almost dropping it because my hands were slick with sweat. I did not bother putting on shoes. I did not stop to save my game or turn off the computer. I did not take my headphones. I did not check the kitchen. I did not open the attic door. I did not call out to ask if anyone was there. I knew no one should have been there. And I knew I did not want an answer. I moved to my bedroom door and stopped for half a second with my hand on the knob. That was the worst moment, because opening that door meant facing the hallway. My room was bright now, but the hallway outside was dark. The light switch for the hall was farther down, and I suddenly had this awful thought that something might be standing on the other side of the door, waiting for me to open it. Behind me, above the ceiling, the floorboards creaked again. I opened the door. The hallway was empty. I did not look back. I ran. I ran down the hall, down the stairs, and past the kitchen without looking in. I remember seeing the kitchen out of the corner of my eye, but I refused to turn my head. I did not want to see what had fallen. I did not want to see if anything was standing there. I did not want to see if a picture frame was lying on the floor or if the kitchen was perfectly clean. Somehow, both possibilities felt equally bad. The front door felt too far away. Every step through the house felt like moving through thick water. I expected to hear something behind me at any second. I expected footsteps on the stairs. I expected a voice from the attic. I expected the light in the hallway to turn on by itself. I expected a hand on my shoulder. Nothing touched me, but I felt watched the entire way. When I reached the front door, I unlocked it with shaking fingers and shoved it open. The cold evening air hit my face, and I stumbled outside onto the porch. I pulled the door shut behind me, though I do not even remember deciding to do it. It was just instinct. Then I backed down the steps and stood there in the yard, staring at the house like it was not mine anymore. For a while, I just stood there. The windows looked normal from outside. My bedroom window glowed faintly because the light was still on. That was the detail that made my stomach twist all over again. The light was still on because the switch had turned itself on. I could see it through the curtains, proof that the thing had really happened. The rest of the house was dark, too dark. I kept waiting for another light to turn on. I kept waiting for movement behind the glass. I kept waiting to see a shape in the attic vent or a face at an upstairs window. But the house stayed still. Eventually, I sat down on the front steps because my legs felt weak. That is where I am now. I have my phone in my hands. I have called no one yet because I do not even know what I would say. What am I supposed to tell someone? That I ran out of my house because a light switch moved by itself? That something was walking in my attic? That I think my house noticed me? Even typing that makes me feel ridiculous. The old version of me would have laughed at this. I would have told myself to stop being dramatic and go back inside. I would have said it was probably a loose switch, a fallen frame, and an animal in the attic. But the old version of me was not sitting in that room when the air changed. The old version of me did not watch the switch move. The old version of me did not hear those slow, heavy steps stop directly above his head. I keep trying to think of normal reasons, but none of them feel strong enough. A bad switch does not make you feel like every corner of the room is staring at you. A mouse does not walk with heavy, measured footsteps. A falling picture frame does not line up perfectly with everything else. Maybe I am losing my mind. Maybe I am tired. Maybe I spent too long staring at a screen. Maybe all of it has a normal explanation that I will find tomorrow in daylight. But I am not going back inside tonight. I do not care if it starts raining. I do not care if I have to sit here until sunrise. I do not care if my neighbors see me and think I am crazy. There is something about that house right now that feels wrong in a way I cannot explain. It does not feel like home. It feels like a place that has been waiting quietly for me to notice it. And tonight, it finally got my attention. The worst part is that every now and then, while I sit here, I think I hear something inside. It is faint, so faint that I cannot be sure. Maybe it is the pipes. Maybe it is the house settling. Maybe it is just my own fear turning every small sound into something larger. But once, a few minutes ago, I thought I heard a slow creak above my bedroom again. Then another. Step, Pause, step, pause. I am outside, and still, somehow, it feels like whatever is inside knows exactly where I am. Has anything like this ever happened to anyone else? I mean something that made the whole house feel aware of you at the same time. Something that made you feel like you had suddenly become the center of attention for something you could not see. Because I do not know what to believe anymore. I only know that the lights are staying on from now on. And I am not stepping back through that front door until the sun is up. Story 3. My shift at the calf was supposed to end at 11 at night. That was the plan, at least. I had been staring at the clock above the counter since 10:30, counting every slow minute while wiping down tables that were already clean. The calf was almost empty by then, except for one old man in the corner who had been nursing the same black coffee for more than an hour, and a young couple who came in every Friday night like clockwork, ordered one slice of cake to share, and whispered to each other as if the rest of the world did not exist. Outside the glass windows, Florida was dark and humid. The streetlights made the wet pavement shine in dull orange patches, and every time the door opened, a heavy wall of warm air rolled in. The night smelled like rain, gasoline, and old swamp water from somewhere far beyond the road. I was tired enough that even standing still hurt. My feet ached inside my shoes, my back was stiff, and I had a deep headache sitting behind my eyes. I had been working since the afternoon, and all I wanted was to go home, take a shower, and fall into bed. My last bus left a little after 11. If I walked quickly, I could make it to the stop with a few minutes to spare. I had done it plenty of times before. My coworker was supposed to come in at 11 and take over the late shift. It was not a hard job at that hour. Mostly cleaning, making sure the coffee machines were ready for the morning, and serving the few truckers and night workers who came in. But 11 came and went, and my coworker did not show up. At first, I tried calling her. No answer. Then I texted her. Nothing. The old man left. The young couple left. Midnight passed. I watched my bus roll by through the front window, its red taillights disappearing into the dark like it had personally betrayed me. By that point, anger had pushed past tiredness and settled deep in my chest. My coworker finally arrived at 1 in the morning, walking in like nothing had happened. She was 2 hours late. 2 full hours. She mumbled something about her phone dying and her cousin needing a ride, but I barely listened. I was too tired and too angry to argue. I untied my apron, threw it into the back room, grabbed my bag, and walked out before I said something that would get me fired. Once I was outside, the anger faded a little, and fear took its place. The calf sat near the edge of the Tamiami Trail, one of those long Florida roads that can feel normal during the day and completely wrong at night. In daylight, there were cars, tourists, delivery trucks, and people heading toward the Everglades or back toward the city. At 1 in the morning, it felt like the road belonged to something else. The darkness stretched out on both sides, thick and still. Every palm tree looked like a shadow with fingers. Every patch of weeds seemed to move when the wind blew through it. I checked the bus schedule on my phone, even though I already knew the answer. There would not be another bus until morning. My choices were awful. I could sit outside the calf until dawn, alone, with my phone battery already low and the manager ready to destroy me if he found out I had stayed there after hours. I could sleep in the back room and risk getting caught. Or I could try to get a ride from someone passing by. I hated hitchhiking. I had always hated it. My mother had warned me about it since I was a kid. Every news story, every crime show, every whispered local rumor seemed to start with someone getting into the wrong car. And I was a woman in my mid-20s, standing alone on a dark road in the middle of the night. I knew better. I truly did. But exhaustion makes bad choices feel smaller. I told myself I would only get in if the driver looked safe. I told myself I would take a picture of the vehicle. I told myself I would send the license plate to someone, even though there was hardly any signal where I was standing. I told myself a lot of things, because the truth was too embarrassing to admit. The truth was, I was desperate to get home. I stood near the edge of the road with my bag over my shoulder, trying to look calm. A few cars passed without slowing down. One pickup truck honked, and the men inside laughed as they sped away. A large semi rolled past, shaking the air around me. Then came nothing but the buzz of insects, the distant croak of frogs, and the soft hiss of tires on the far end of the road. After about 30 minutes, I saw headlights coming toward me. They were not high like a truck's, and not low like a car's. They moved slowly, almost carefully. As the vehicle came closer, I saw it was a small, white, refrigerated truck, the kind used to deliver meat, seafood, or frozen food to restaurants. The sides were plain white, with no company name painted on them. The back section had thick, insulated doors with heavy metal handles. The whole thing looked old, but not broken down. It looked like it had been washed recently, yet something about it still felt dirty. The truck slowed. My stomach tightened. It pulled onto the shoulder a few yards ahead of me and stopped. For a moment, I did not move. The engine rumbled softly. Cold mist drifted from somewhere under the back section, mixing with the night air. I remember thinking it looked like breath coming out of a mouth. The passenger window rolled down a few inches. The driver did not lean across to look at me. He just sat there, facing forward. I could only see part of him through the dark cabin. He wore a long, heavy coat, which made no sense in Florida heat. The collar was turned up around his neck. A dark hat sat low on his head, tilted forward, so the brim hid most of his face. From the side, I saw a thick beard, strange and coarse-looking, covering his jaw and throat. Something about him felt wrong, not just dangerous. Wrong, it was as if the air around the truck had changed. The night seemed quieter near it. Even the insects sounded farther away. I felt a cold pressure in my chest, like my body was trying to warn me before my mind could explain why. But I was tired. I was angry. I was scared of being stuck on that road until morning. So I ignored the warning. I walked to the passenger door and opened it. A smell hit me as soon as I climbed in. It was so strong that I almost gagged. It smelled like raw meat, old sweat, and hot breath that had never known toothpaste. Under it all was another smell I could not place. Something musky, something animal. The inside of the cab was dark, except for the dashboard lights glowing dull green. The seat felt sticky under my hand. There were fast food wrappers on the floor, an empty bottle near the gear shift, and a brown paper bag between us. The driver still did not look directly at me. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He named a road not too far from my apartment. It was close enough. I told him my street was near there. He gave a slow nod and pulled back onto the road. For the first few minutes, I tried to convince myself I was being dramatic. Maybe he was just a strange old man. Maybe he worked nights. Maybe he wore the coat because the refrigeration unit made the truck cold. Maybe the smell was from the cargo in the back. Maybe I had watched too many crime shows, heard too many warnings, and let my fear turn a simple ride into something it was not. But the longer I sat there, the harder it became to lie to myself. He drove with both hands on the wheel. His fingers were long and covered by dark gloves. The brim of his hat kept his face hidden, and the beard was too thick to look normal. It did not move like hair should. It looked rough and heavy, like fur matted against his skin. The road ahead was empty. The truck's headlights cut a pale path through the darkness. On either side, the trees and swamp grass slid past like black walls. I could hear the low hum of the refrigeration unit behind us. Every now and then, something in the back gave a soft thump, like cargo shifting. I told myself not to panic. 15 minutes passed in silence. My heart was beating so hard that I could feel it in my throat. I needed to do something normal. I needed to make the ride feel like a ride and not a trap. So I cleared my throat and turned slightly toward him, ready to say something simple about the weather or the late hour. Before I could speak, his voice cut through the cab. "There's a piece of cheese in the bag," he said. "Hand it to me." His voice froze me. It was low, raspy, and rough. Not just like a smoker's voice. It was deeper than that, almost wet, like every word was dragged across something sharp inside his throat. There was a mean sound in it, too, a dark amusement that made my skin crawl. I looked down at the brown paper bag between us. I did not want to touch it. I did not want to move at all. But his head turned slightly toward me. Not enough for me to see his face, only enough for me to know he was waiting. With shaking fingers, I reached into the bag. Inside were a few wrapped items, something greasy in foil, and a small piece of cheese in clear plastic. I pulled it out and held it toward him. He did not take his hands off the wheel. "Feed me," he said. I stared at him, not understanding. "What?" "Extend your hand," he said, still looking at the road. "I will take it with my mouth." A cold wave went through me. Every part of me screamed not to do it. My brain filled with all the things I should have done differently. I should have waited at the cafe. I should have called a cab. I should have called my sister, my brother, anyone. I should have stayed angry at my coworker instead of letting that anger push me into a stranger's truck. But now I was inside. We were moving fast down an empty road. I had no idea where we were. No cars were behind us. No houses were nearby. If I made him angry, I did not know what he would do. So I opened the plastic wrapper. My hand trembled as I held the cheese out toward him. He leaned closer. The smell got worse. For one terrible second, I thought I might see his face under the hat. But the shadow covered everything except the lower part of his beard. His mouth opened somewhere inside that darkness. Then something wet touched my fingers. I almost screamed. It was a tongue, but it did not feel human. It was rough, dry, and abrasive, like sandpaper being dragged across my skin. It slid over my fingertips and scraped against them as it pulled the cheese from my hand. He made a deep sound in his throat. It was not a laugh. It was a purr, a slow, heavy purr that vibrated through the cab and into my bones. He rumbled. "Delicious." I pulled my hand back and pressed it against my chest, wiping my fingers on my shirt without thinking. My stomach rolled. I could still feel that awful tongue on my skin. Then he spoke again. "Your scent is attractive," he said. I love your scent mixed with cheese. No, that was the moment fear swallowed me whole. There was no more pretending, no more excuses, no more telling myself he was only strange. I was trapped in a white refrigerated truck with a man who did not sound right, did not smell right, and had just licked cheese from my hand with a tongue that felt like an animal's. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My fingers were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped it. The screen lit up, and my heart sank. No service. Of course there was no service. I stared at the empty bars at the top of the screen, feeling the world shrink around me. Then I did the only thing I could think of. I pressed the phone to my ear and pretended to make a call. "Hey," I said, forcing my voice to sound casual. "Yeah, I'm close. I'm in a white refrigerated truck right now. Just wait outside for me, okay? I'll be there in a few minutes." It was a stupid lie, a weak lie. But I hoped it would be enough. I hoped he would think someone knew where I was. I hoped he would get nervous and let me out. The driver did not slow down. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he laughed. It was a low, guttural sound, deep and ugly, like something growling in a cave. "No need to lie," he said. "Your scent worsens when you lie." My mouth went dry. I lowered the phone slowly. The truck kept rolling through the black road. The dashboard lights glowed against his gloves. The cold hum from the back grew louder. Or maybe I was only noticing it more now. Then I heard something behind me. At first it was faint, a dull bump from the refrigerated section. Then another. Then a sound like fingernails dragging across metal. I turned my head toward the back wall of the cab. There was no window between the cab and the refrigerated box, only a metal wall. The sound came again, clearer this time. Scratching. Then a muffled cry. My blood turned cold. Someone was in the back. Someone was trapped in there. The cry came again, weak and frightened, followed by more desperate scratching. It was not cargo shifting. It was not meat hanging from hooks or boxes sliding around. It was a person. Maybe more than one. I looked at the driver, and in that instant, every nightmare I had ever heard about became real. He was not just a strange man. He was not just a creep. He had someone locked in the refrigerated back of his truck. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Before I could react, something moved in the darkness near my feet. At first, I thought it was a cable or a strap from under the seat. Then it lifted. A tail. A massive, furry tail. It came from the driver's side, curling out from beneath his long coat like a living rope. It was thick, long, and covered in dark fur. It looked like a cat's tail, but far too large to belong to any cat. It moved slowly, smoothly, with a terrible kind of patience. I could not breathe. The tail slid across the floor and touched my ankle. I jerked back, but there was nowhere to go. It moved up my leg, wrapping around my calf, then my thigh. The fur brushed against my jeans, and I felt the strength inside it. It was not loose or playful. It coiled like it could crush me if it wanted to. I pressed my back against the passenger door. The driver kept looking at the road. The tail climbed higher. It moved around my waist and pulled tight. Not enough to hurt, but enough to make sure I knew I could not easily get away. Then it crept up my stomach and rested against my chest, right over my heart. My heartbeat was racing. The tail seemed to feel it. It pressed there, warm and heavy, moving slightly with each frantic beat. I wanted to scream. I wanted to beg him to stop, but my throat was locked. The scratching from the back came again. The muffled crying followed. And that sound, mixed with the tail pressing against my chest, broke something inside me. I stopped thinking. I stopped being frozen. The truck slowed suddenly as it approached a speed bump near a small side road. It was not stopping, but it was slow enough. The door was beside me. The handle was inches from my hand. Survival took over. With all the strength I had, I grabbed the huge tail and shoved it away from my chest. It was heavier than I expected, and the fur felt thick and rough under my palms. The tail tightened for a second, as if surprised, and I used that tiny moment to yank the door handle. The door flew open. Warm night air rushed in. The driver's head snapped toward me. For one split second, I saw something under the brim of his hat. Not clearly, just a flash of eyes reflecting green in the dashboard glow. Then I jumped. The ground hit me like a wall. Pain exploded through my shoulder, hip, and knees as I slammed into the asphalt and rolled hard into the gravel. My bag flew somewhere into the dark. My phone skidded away. I heard the truck's tires crunch, heard the engine roar, heard the open door slam shut or maybe swing in the wind. For a few seconds, I could not move. My whole body burned. My palms were torn. My elbow was bleeding. Tiny stones had cut into my skin. I tasted dirt and blood in my mouth. Then, I heard the truck slowing. That was enough. I forced myself up. I did not look back. I ran. I ran blindly down the side of the road, limping, stumbling, half sobbing with every breath. My legs felt weak, but terror kept them moving. The darkness around me seemed alive. Every shadow looked like the truck. Every sound behind me felt like that tail sliding across the floor. Far ahead, I saw lights, a gas station. It sat at the side of the road like the only safe place left in the world. Its sign buzzed over the empty pumps. The small store was still open, bright and white, under fluorescent lights. I ran toward it with everything I had. The man behind the counter saw me through the window and came running before I reached the door. I must have looked insane, bleeding from my arms and face, crying, shaking, unable to speak properly. He locked the door behind me and called the police. I remember sitting on the floor between shelves of chips and motor oil, wrapped in a cheap blanket, trying to explain what had happened. I told the police about the white refrigerated truck. I told them about the driver. I told them about the smell, the coat, the hat, the cheese, the rough tongue, the crying from the back, and the massive tail. The first officer wrote down everything until I mentioned the tail. Then his pen slowed. His face changed. He did not laugh, but I could tell he did not believe that part. I did not blame him. If someone had told me the same story, I would not have believed it either. They asked if I had been drinking. I had not. They asked if I had hit my head when I jumped. I told them maybe, but I had seen the tail before that. They asked if I could have imagined it because of fear. I said no, but by then I could see it in their eyes. A young woman got into a stranger's truck, panicked, jumped out, and invented the rest, because trauma does strange things to the mind. That was what they thought. My sister picked me up from the hospital later that morning. I had bruises all over, cuts on my palms and knees, and a swollen shoulder that hurt every time I moved. But I was alive. For the next 2 days, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt that tongue scraping over my fingers. I smelled raw meat and rotten breath. I heard the muffled crying from the back of the truck. Worst of all, I felt that thick tail pressing against my chest, feeling my heart race like it was enjoying my fear. I kept asking myself why he had let me escape. The truck had slowed, yes, but he could have stopped. He could have chased me. He could have grabbed me with that tail before I opened the door. He could have done 100 things, but he had not. That bothered me more than anything. 2 days after that night, I was sitting in the living room with my sister. She had insisted I stay with her for a while because she did not want me alone. I was on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, with a cup of tea getting cold in my hands. She was sitting on the other end, flipping through TV channels without really watching anything. I was staring at the carpet, lost in my own thoughts, when her hand suddenly froze on the remote. The sound from the TV changed to a news broadcast. My sister leaned forward. Then, she pointed at the screen. "Look," she whispered. "Isn't that the truck you were in?" I lifted my head. The cup almost slipped from my hands. On the screen was a white refrigerated truck. It was parked on the side of a road, surrounded by police cars with flashing lights. Yellow tape had been stretched across the area. Officers moved around the vehicle, while reporters stood at a distance. Even through the camera, I recognized the plain white sides, the heavy back doors, and the shape of the cab. My body went cold. The news anchor was speaking in a serious voice. Police had found the truck after a call from someone who heard banging from inside the refrigerated compartment. The vehicle belonged to a man named John Meyer. He was a suspected serial killer, already connected to the disappearances of 10 girls under the age of 20. For months, police had been searching for him. 2 missing girls had just been found alive inside the truck. Alive, my sister covered her mouth. I could not move. Then the broadcast showed one of the surviving girls giving a statement. Her face was pale. A blanket was wrapped around her shoulders. She looked like she had not slept in days. Her eyes kept moving off camera, as if she expected something to step out of the dark at any second. She spoke in a shaking voice. She said John Meyer had taken them from a bar. She said he had tricked them at first, then forced them into the back of the truck and tied their hands. They had been locked inside the refrigerated compartment, freezing, crying, and scratching at the metal walls, trying to get someone to hear them. Then she said something that made the room around me disappear. She said that while they were being driven somewhere, the truck suddenly screeched to a stop. At first, they thought someone had hit them. Then, they heard a violent struggle outside. Heavy blows, a scream, something crashing against the side of the truck. She said it sounded like a man being torn apart. Then, the back door flew open. A figure stood outside. The girls were too scared to see clearly, but the person lifted John Meyer's body and threw him into the back with them. He was already dead. The girl on TV started crying as she said that part. She said John Meyer landed near their feet, his eyes open, his face frozen in terror. Then the back door shut again. A moment later, they heard someone climb into the driver's seat, and the truck started moving. My sister slowly turned to look at me. I could not speak. The girl on the screen continued. She said the truck drove for a while. Then it stopped again. That must have been when I got in. She said they heard a woman's voice from the front cabin, but they could not make out what I was saying. They tried to scream louder. They scratched the walls. They begged for help. But the refrigeration unit was loud, and the metal walls were thick. After more driving, the truck stopped for the final time. The back doors opened. The same figure stood there. He wore a long coat and a tilted hat that hid his face. He did not rush. He did not panic. He calmly untied the ropes around their wrists and told them not to touch the dead man. Everything is fine, he said. Then he stepped back into the night. The girl stared into the camera, trembling. I swear on my life, she said. As he turned to leave, I saw a huge, long tail moving under his coat. A freezing chill rushed through my whole body. The room was silent, except for the TV. My sister whispered my name, but I barely heard her. Everything I thought I understood about that night shifted. The crying and scratching I had heard from the back of the truck had not been victims being tortured by the monster in the driver's seat. It had been the terror of two girls locked in the dark with the fresh corpse of the man who had abducted them. The driver, the thing with the sandpaper tongue and the monstrous tail, had not been working with John Meyer. He had killed him. He had taken his truck. He had freed those girls. And I had climbed into that truck after the nightmare had already changed hands. That truth should have comforted me. It did not. Because even now, I still remember the way he smelled my fear. I still remember the way he knew I was lying. I still remember his rough tongue on my skin and that heavy tail pressed against my heart. I remember the strange purr in his throat when he tasted the cheese from my fingers, and the awful sentence he whispered in the dark. Your scent is attractive. Maybe he saved those girls. Maybe he saved me too, in some strange way I will never understand. But I cannot call him safe. I cannot call him human. And every time I pass a white refrigerated truck on the road, my stomach turns cold. I look for a company logo. I look for a driver's face. I look at the shadows under the door and the space beneath the coat if the driver is wearing one. Because somewhere out there, on some empty road late at night, something with a tilted hat, a rough tongue, and a long furry tail may still be driving. Maybe he is hunting monsters. Maybe he only hunts the worst people. But I know one thing for sure. If he ever pulls over for me again, I will keep walking until sunrise. Story 4. I do not expect sympathy from you. I learned a long time ago that sympathy is not something people give easily, especially when they think they already know what kind of person you are. They look at your face, hear one ugly part of your past, and decide the rest for themselves. They do not ask questions. They do not wait for the truth. They only want someone to blame. When it happened, no one felt sorry for me. Not really. They said the right words at first, because that is what people do when a child dies. They lowered their voices. They touched my shoulder. They told me they were sorry, but behind their eyes, I could see what they were really thinking. They were wondering if I had done it. I cannot even say I blamed them completely. I was never the kind of mother people expected me to be. I did not glow when Emily was born. I did not become full of light and purpose. I did not suddenly understand what love was supposed to feel like. I remember holding her in the hospital and feeling nothing but fear, pain, and a terrible emptiness that made me feel like I had fallen out of my own body. Postpartum depression is real. People say that now, like saying the words makes them understand it. But most people still think it means crying for a few weeks after giving birth, or being tired, or needing help with laundry and bottles. No one warned me that it could eat through years of my life. No one warned me that I could look at my own child and feel like there was a wall of glass between us. Emily was 4 years old when it happened. 4 years old, with soft brown hair, a little round face, and a laugh that sounded like bells in another room. I remember that laugh more clearly now than I ever noticed it when she was alive. That is one of the cruelest things about grief. It gives you back everything too late. I was not very attached to her. There, I said it. That is the part people never forgave me for, even though I never said it out loud back then. Sometimes I could barely stand to look at her. Sometimes the sound of her calling me Mommy made my whole body tighten with panic instead of warmth. Sometimes I wanted to hide in the bathroom with the shower running just so I would not hear her. But I would never have hurt her. I need you to understand that, even if you hate me by the end of this. I was broken, yes, I was distant. I was tired in a way sleep could not fix. But I never raised a hand to Emily. I never wanted her dead. I never wanted anything bad to happen to her. Ben was the real link between us. My husband back then. My ex-husband now. Ben was the one who woke up early. Ben made pancakes on Saturday mornings and cut them into little shapes for Emily. Ben knew which stuffed animal she needed when she was upset. Ben knew how to braid her hair badly, but with great confidence. Ben remembered the doctor appointments, the preschool forms, the birthday invitations, the little plastic cups she liked best. He picked up the slack whenever I could not. And there was a lot of slack. At first, I hated myself for it. Then, I hated him for being so good at it. Then I hated the whole house, the whole life, the smiling family photos on the walls that made me feel like a stranger had been placed in my place. Ben never said he hated me, but I could feel his patience getting thinner over the years. He was kind, but kindness can still become cold when it is stretched too far. For a while, though, it worked. Not well, but enough. Emily had one parent who was fully there. I was in the house, but Ben was the home. All of that changed one Saturday morning. It was normal for me to sleep in. By then, Ben had stopped expecting anything different. Saturday mornings belonged to him and Emily. I would hear them sometimes through the bedroom door, their voices low and happy in the kitchen. Emily would laugh at cartoons. Ben would tell her not to spill juice. The toaster would pop. The TV would play too loudly. Life would happen on the other side of the wall while I stayed under the blankets, unable to move. That morning, I do not remember waking up naturally. I remember Ben bursting into the bedroom. The door hit the wall so hard the frame shook. I opened my eyes and saw him standing there in the gray morning light, his face twisted into something I had never seen before. Not fear, not grief, something beyond both. "What did you do?" he screamed. I did not understand. I sat up, dizzy and confused, my mouth dry, my hair stuck to my face. He crossed the room and grabbed my shoulders, shaking me so hard my teeth clicked together. "What did you do? What did you do?" I kept asking him what he was talking about. I kept saying his name. Ben, stop, what happened? Where is Emily?" The moment I said her name, he made a sound I still hear in my dreams. Emily was dead. She had suffocated overnight. I will not describe what she looked like when I saw her, because some things should not be turned into words. I will only say that the room felt too quiet, too clean, too ordinary. Her little blanket was there. Her stuffed rabbit was there. The curtains were half open, and sunlight was starting to push its way in like it had no idea the world had ended. We never had a chance to help her because the baby monitor had been turned off that night. That became the center of everything. The monitor was always on. Always, even when Emily was older, Ben insisted on keeping it in her room because she had started getting night terrors. Sometimes she would wake up crying in the dark, and Ben would go to her. He always went to her. But that night, the monitor was off. I did not remember turning it off. I did not remember touching it. I barely remembered going to bed. But nobody cared about what I remembered. They cared about my history. They cared that I had depression. They cared that I was the mother who did not smile enough, who did not hold her child enough, who sometimes looked at her daughter like she was afraid of her. The police came. The paramedics came. Neighbors stood outside our house in their robes and slippers, whispering into their phones. I sat on the couch with a blanket around my shoulders, though I was not cold. Someone kept asking me questions. Someone else kept watching my hands. Ben would not sit near me. That was the first time I understood that I had lost both of them. The investigation that followed was a second kind of death. People call it procedure. They call it necessary. Maybe it was, but to me it felt like being skinned alive in public. Every part of my life was pulled open. My medical records, my medication, my therapy notes, my old messages to Ben where I said I could not do this anymore, my moments of anger, my days of silence. Every time I had failed as a mother was collected and held up like evidence. And Ben helped them. I know he was grieving. I know grief can turn love into a weapon. But knowing that does not erase what he did. He told them I had trouble bonding with Emily. He told them I slept too much. He told them he was worried about leaving Emily alone with me, even though he had never said that to my face. He told them about the time he came home and found me sitting in the kitchen while Emily cried in her room because I could not make myself stand up. All of it was true. That was the worst part. They tried to pin everything on me because of my mental health history, and I was almost willing to let them. I did not fight back. I did not defend myself the way an innocent person is supposed to. I was too tired, too empty. A part of me believed that even if I had not killed Emily, I had failed her badly enough to deserve punishment. Maybe I had not turned off the monitor. Maybe I had. Maybe I had done it in my sleep. Maybe some dark part of me, the part I had tried to ignore for 4 years, had reached out in the night and made sure I would not hear her. Those thoughts followed me everywhere. Eventually, Emily's death was ruled an accident. There was no proof that I had hurt her. No proof that I had turned off the monitor. No proof of anything except a terrible mistake that could not be fixed. I was cleared of wrongdoing. But that did not mean I was free. People had already decided what they believed. In their minds, I was the mother who got away with murder. The woman who cried too little at the funeral. The woman whose husband could not stand beside her. The woman whose own child died in the dark while she slept. Ben divorced me before the year was over. There was no dramatic fight at the end. No screaming, no broken dishes. He simply became a stranger who knew everything about me. One day he told me he could not look at me anymore. His voice was flat. Dead, I wanted to tell him I could not look at myself either, but I did not. We signed papers. We sold the house. He kept some of Emily's things. I kept nothing because I did not think I deserved to. After the divorce, I moved as far away as I could afford to go. I did not have money for a fresh start in a nice city or some peaceful place by the ocean. I found a small town in the middle of nowhere, the kind of place people pass through without remembering its name. It had one main road, one grocery store, one gas station, and a diner that stayed open late because truckers used it on their way through. That was where I found work. The diner smelled like coffee, grease, old vinyl seats, and bleach. The floor was always sticky no matter how often we mopped it. The regulars called me Han, even though I was not young enough for it to feel sweet. Nobody there knew me at first, and that was the greatest gift I had been given in years. For a while, I managed to pretend everything was all right. I rented a small house near the edge of town. It had 2 bedrooms, though I only used one. The wallpaper was old, with faded yellow flowers that looked brown in the evening. The pipes knocked at night. The front porch sagged. In winter, cold air slipped under the door no matter how many towels I pushed against it. But it was quiet. No one looked at me like they knew what I had done. No one whispered baby killer when I walked by. No one asked if I had children. If they did, I lied and said no. That lie hurt every time, but it hurt less than the truth. My life became small. Work, home, sleep. Some days I ate. Some days I forgot. I learned which customers tipped well and which ones would complain just to get free pie. I learned to smile without meaning it. I learned to keep moving, because stopping meant remembering. The first time I heard Emily's voice again, it was almost 2 years after I moved there. It was late, near midnight. I had just come home from a double shift at the diner. My feet were aching from standing all day in those stiff black shoes, and my back felt like it had been bent in the wrong shape. My hair smelled like fryer oil. My uniform had a coffee stain on the sleeve. I was so tired that I sat in my car for 5 full minutes after parking, just staring at the dark windows of my house. I almost went straight to bed, but I was starving. That kind of hunger that feels sharp and mean. I opened the fridge and found almost nothing. A few carrots, half an onion, some celery that had gone soft at the ends, a carton of broth, enough for soup if I did not care how sad it tasted. I turned on the kitchen light, kicked off my shoes, and started chopping vegetables. The house was quiet, except for the tap dripping into the sink and the soft thud of the knife against the cutting board. Outside, wind moved through the trees. The living room beside the kitchen was dark because I had not bothered turning on the lamp. I could see only the edge of the couch and the black rectangle of the TV screen. I was cutting the onion when I heard it. "Mommy?" The knife stopped halfway down. At first, my mind tried to make it into something else. A sound from outside. A cat. A neighbor's child. The TV in another house. Anything, but I knew that voice. My blood went cold so fast it felt like someone had poured ice water down my spine. "Mommy?" it said again. It was Emily's voice. Not a memory, not a thought, not something inside my head. It came from the living room, the dark living room. I gripped the knife so tightly my hand began to ache. My breath came out in small, broken sounds. I wanted to run, but my legs would not move. Then the voice spoke again. "Where were you?" I started shaking. "Why didn't you protect me?" I closed my eyes. I thought maybe if I did not look, it would stop. Maybe grief had finally broken something in my mind. Maybe this was what I deserved. Maybe after years of waiting, the guilt had found a voice. "I was dying," Emily said from the darkness, "and you didn't even notice." A small sound escaped my mouth. Not a scream, not even a word, just pain. I wanted to say I was sorry, I wanted to fall to my knees and beg forgiveness from a child who could not forgive me. I wanted to explain that I had been sick, that I had been lost, that I had loved her in some damaged way I had never known how to show. But beneath all that grief, something else moved inside me. Fear, because the voice was perfect, but it was also not perfect. There was something under it, something stretched, something too careful, like a person pretending to be a little girl after listening to one through a wall. The pauses were wrong. The sweetness was wrong. Emily had spoken quickly when she was scared, words tumbling over each other. This voice waited between sentences like it was watching me react. I opened my eyes. The living room stayed dark. Emily? I whispered. The silence after her name felt huge. Then the voice answered, softer this time. I'm so scared, Mommy. My stomach twisted. It's dark. I don't know where I am. I took one step toward the doorway. I do not know why. Maybe because for one insane second, I believed that if Emily was really there, if some part of her had found me, I had to go to her. I had failed her once. I could not fail her again. The knife was still in my hand. I held it low at my side, though I knew it would not help. The kitchen light reached only a little way into the living room. Beyond that, the room was thick with shadow. The old couch sat against the far wall. The coffee table was a darker shape in front of it. The TV screen reflected a thin slice of the kitchen, but nothing more. Save me, Mommy, the voice said. It came from near the window. I stopped at the doorway. I did not step inside. Every part of my body was screaming at me not to cross that line. Please, it said. It hurts. Tears ran down my face. I did not remember starting to cry. I'm sorry, I whispered. Something in the living room shifted. It was a small movement, a slow drag against the floor. My fingers tightened around the knife. Come here, the voice said. It no longer sounded exactly like Emily. It sounded like her voice had been pushed through a mouth that was too large. Mommy needs to come here. I could hear breathing now. Not a child's breathing. Not even human breathing. It was wet and heavy, pulling in air like lungs filled with mud. It came from low to the floor at first, then higher, as if whatever was in the room was standing up. My eyes adjusted a little more. I saw the window. I saw the curtains moving, though the window was closed. And then I saw a shape in front of them. Only part of it was visible. A pale curve, a long arm. Something bent the wrong way. It was too tall to be Emily, too wide, too thin in places and swollen in others. It was crouched near the window, but even crouched, it seemed taller than any person should be. My mind tried to protect me by refusing to understand what I was seeing. Then it smiled. I did not see the whole face. I only saw the smile. It spread open in the dark, slow and white. I dropped the knife. The sound of it hitting the floor broke whatever spell had held me there. The thing spoke again in Emily's voice. Don't leave me. I ran. I did not grab my purse. I did not grab my phone. I did not turn off the stove. I ran through the kitchen, out the back door, and into the cold night air in my socks. Gravel cut into my feet as I crossed the driveway. I heard something move inside the house behind me. A hard thump, then another, like furniture being knocked aside. Mommy, it screamed. This time, it did not sound like Emily at all. I reached my car and yanked the door open. My hands shook so badly I dropped the keys twice before I got them into the ignition. The engine coughed, then started. The back door of the house slammed open. I did not look. I reversed so fast I nearly hit the mailbox. Then I turned onto the road and drove. I drove through town, past the dark diner, past the gas station, past the church with the white wooden sign out front. I drove until the houses disappeared, and the road became a long black strip between empty fields and trees. I kept waiting to see something in the back seat. I kept hearing Emily's voice in my head, asking why I had not protected her. I told myself it was not her. I told myself it was not her. But that did not make it better. Because if it was not Emily, then something else knew her voice. Something else knew what had happened. Something else had reached into the deepest, most rotten part of me and used my dead daughter like bait. I drove until the fuel light came on. Then I drove more. The road stretched ahead with no houses, no streetlights, no other cars. My breath fogged the windshield from the inside. My hands ached from gripping the wheel. Every shadow at the edge of the headlights looked like a body. Every tree looked like it had a face. When the car finally began to slow, I screamed at it like that would help. The engine sputtered. The wheels rolled onto the shoulder. Then, everything went still. The tank was empty. I sat there on the side of the road, shaking so hard my teeth hurt. I had no phone, no coat, no shoes. The night pressed against the windows from every side. For a while, I just stared ahead. Then, slowly, I looked in the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. I started to cry again, but no sound came out. I thought about Emily's room. I thought about the baby monitor. I thought about Ben screaming, "What did you do?" I thought about how easy it had been for everyone to believe the worst of me. And then I remembered something that made my whole body go numb. As I had driven away from the house, I had looked once in the rearview mirror. Just once. The house had been small in the distance, its dark windows facing the road. But one window was not dark. The living room window had been filled with a pale shape pressed close to the glass. It had been smiling at me, not like a child, not like a ghost, like something patient, something that had found me after all those years, something that knew I would hear Emily's voice and come closer. I do not know how long I sat in the dead car before headlights appeared behind me. A trucker stopped and called for help. He asked me what had happened, but I could not explain. How could I? I could not tell him my dead daughter had called me from my living room. I could not tell him something wearing her voice had asked me to save it. So I told him I had run out of gas. The police took me back to town after sunrise. I begged them not to make me go inside the house, but of course they did not understand. 2 officers checked the rooms while I stood in the yard with a blanket around my shoulders. They found the back door open. They found the knife on the kitchen floor. They found the stove still on, the broth boiled down to a burnt stain in the pot. They found no one inside. No footprints. No broken window. No sign of forced entry. Nothing missing. Nothing moved except for one thing: the baby monitor. I did not own a baby monitor. I had not seen one in years. But there it was, sitting on the coffee table in the living room. Old, white plastic, yellowed with age. The same model Ben and I had used for Emily. The same little crack near the speaker from the time he dropped it on the kitchen tile. At first, the officers thought it belonged to me. I told them it did not. They did not believe me. Why would they? People had stopped believing me a long time ago. One of them picked it up. The monitor was switched off. I left that town before the week was over. I did not pack everything. I did not return to the diner. I did not tell anyone where I was going. I took what I could carry and got on a bus heading north, then another heading west, then another. I kept moving until my money almost ran out. But distance has not helped. Sometimes I wake in the night and hear static. Sometimes I hear a little girl crying through the walls. Sometimes, when I pass dark windows, I see a pale shape pull back too quickly. I still do not know what happened the night Emily died. I do not know if the monitor turned off by accident. I do not know if Ben was right to blame me. I do not know if some part of me failed her in a way I can never understand. But I know something else now. There are things in this world that do not need to kill you right away. Some things wait until you are already hollow. They wait until grief has made a home inside you. Then they speak in the voice you would do anything to hear again. And if you are weak enough, lonely enough, guilty enough, you will walk toward the dark. You will almost let them in. I do not expect sympathy from you. But if you ever hear someone you love calling from a room where no one should be, do not answer. And whatever it says, do not go closer. Story 5. Mr. Dixon, the state is trying to put a lot of crimes on me, and the worst one is the death of that girl. They say I did it, but I swear on everything I know, it was not me. I am getting Mr. Quincy to write this letter for me because my hand shakes too much, and because he knows words better than I do. But you are the only man I know who may even try to help a young black man get out from under a murder charge like this. I am going to tell you the same thing I told them. I know it sounds wild. I know it sounds like the talk of a madman. But it is the truth, and I need your help before they hang me for something I did not do. A strange man came into town 2 or 3 days before all this happened. Mr. McCarthy was the first one who spoke to me about him. He told me to keep an eye on the man because new men did not come through Statesboro very often. Not like that. Not without someone knowing who they were or where they came from. Mr. McCarthy said all I had to do was follow him from a distance and watch where he went. He told me not to make it plain. He told me not to talk to the man and not to let the man see me watching. He said he would give me 2 cents if I did it right. At first, I did not understand why Mr. McCarthy cared so much. The man was white, and in this town, white men did not usually make the sheriff nervous. It was men like me who got watched, questioned, and blamed. So when Mr. McCarthy told me that this stranger made his skin crawl, I thought maybe he was only drunk or trying to scare me. But later I understood what he meant. He told me the stranger was too pale. Pale like milk, pale like the belly of a dead fish. He said that was the strangest part, because folks said the man had walked up from the south. Anybody walking under that sun should have had some red on his face, some brown on his neck, some dust on his clothes. But this man had none. It was like the sun had refused to touch him. Mr. McCarthy said the man first showed himself in one of the bars after dark. Nobody saw him come into town. Nobody saw him ride in, and nobody saw him walk down the road. 1 minute the stool at the bar was empty, and the next minute he was sitting there with a glass of whiskey in his hand. He did not speak much. He only sat there, drinking slow, with his long black hair hanging around his face. The girls in the bar did not like him. They said he made the air feel wrong. They would not go near him, not even for money, not even when he raised his hand for another drink. The men watched him for a while. Some of them laughed at him, but they did not laugh too close. Then one of Mr. McCarthy's younger officers got rough with one of the girls. I do not know exactly what happened, but the girl cried out, and that was when the pale man changed. He stood up fast and knocked his stool backward. Then he threw a chair across the room like it weighed nothing. He screamed some words no one understood and ran out into the night. Mr. McCarthy said the sound of his voice made every glass behind the bar shake. He said nobody chased him because nobody wanted to be the first man out the door after him. The next morning, one of the farmhands came to the station talking about a dead calf. He said the calf had been torn open in a way no dog or wolf would do. The officers got worried after that. They started talking about drifters, devils, sickness, and old crimes that had never been solved. That was when the sheriff found me and told me to look for the pale man. He did not say it in front of the others. He took me to the side and spoke low. He said, "Find him. Watch him. Come back and tell me where he goes." He promised me 2 cents. 2 cents is not much, but it was more than I had, so I went. I looked everywhere I could think to look. I checked the hotels, the bars, and the alleys behind the stores. I walked past the whorehouses and asked careful questions without making people too angry. I checked the old sheds near the edge of town. I looked at Sammy's barn and Todd's barn. I even walked down by the creek where strangers sometimes slept when they had no money for a room. I found nothing. No one had seen him after he ran from the bar. It was like the ground opened and took him. By the time the sun was going down, I was tired and ready to give up. I was leaving Sammy's farm when I saw someone out in the sheep field about 50 feet away. At first, I thought it was a post or a broken tree because he was so still and bent over. Then he moved, and the moonlight caught his face. I knew right then that Mr. McCarthy had been telling the truth. The man's skin was so pale it almost shined in the dusk. His hair was long and black, longer than any man's hair I had seen, and it hung down his back like wet rope. He was thin and tall, but not tall in a normal way. His shoulders were hunched, and his arms hung too low. They reached past his knees. I remember thinking no man's arms should be that long. The sheep were all staring at him. They were angry and restless, making those low sounds sheep make when they know something is wrong. But they did not run. They only stood there while he walked among them. Then he reached down, grabbed a lamb by the neck with one hand, and lifted it from the ground. The lamb kicked and twisted. It should have been hard for him to hold. It should have taken both hands. But he held it in one hand like a bundle of rags. I thought about running to tell Sammy. I thought about shouting for someone. But the sheriff had told me to watch, not to make trouble. He had told me to see where the man went. So I stayed back and followed. The pale man dragged the lamb down the road. He did not hurry, and he did not turn around. I kept as far behind as I could while still seeing him in the moonlight. The lamb fought the whole way. It kicked, jerked, and made small choking sounds because his hand was tight around its throat. The night should have been normal. There were cicadas in the trees and crickets in the grass, but those sounds only made everything worse. They were so steady and loud that it felt like the whole world was trying to cover up what I was seeing. We walked for about a mile. He never looked back once. Not once. That may sound like nothing, but it scared me. A man being followed usually feels it. A thief looks over his shoulder. A drunk stumbles and turns. But this man walked like he already knew where I was and did not care. At the end of that road was Nora's cabin. You know the place, or maybe you have heard of it. It sits a little away from the others, close to the trees. Nora lived there with her daughter. I did not see Nora that night. I still do not know where she was. The pale man walked straight to the door with the lamb hanging from his hand. He did not knock. He did not call out. He opened the door and went inside like the house belonged to him. I knew then that something bad was happening. I ran to the side of the cabin and looked through the window. My heart was beating so hard that I could feel it in my teeth. Inside, there was a man I had never seen before, sitting at Nora's table. He was not the pale man. This was another stranger. He sat very straight with both hands on the table, like he had been waiting. That confused me, because now there were two strange men in town, and nobody had said one word about the second. Before I could make sense of it, the pale man kicked the door open wider from inside. The sound made Nora's daughter run in from the other room. She looked scared, but not surprised in the way I expected. It was like she had been hiding and knew some trouble was coming. The pale man swung the lamb and threw it at the stranger sitting at the table. He threw it hard. The poor animal hit the man and the table, and dishes flew everywhere. Then the pale man screamed. "Mr. Dixon, I have heard men scream in fights. I have heard men scream when a horse stepped on them. I have heard railroad men shout over an engine. This was not like any of that." His voice was high, but it was also huge, like it came from the ceiling and the floor at the same time. It hurt my ears. He shouted words I could not understand. It sounded like "brother under our unholy father," or maybe "fodder." I do not know. It was evil-sounding talk, old and wrong. I covered my ears, but I kept looking over the windowsill. Nora's daughter grabbed a knife from the rack on the wall. She ran at the pale man and swung at him. She was brave, braver than I was. But he kicked her once, and she flew across the room like she weighed no more than a sack of cotton. She hit the wall and fell hard. Then the pale man rushed toward a goat that was hiding under the table. I do not know where that goat came from. Maybe Nora kept it in the house at night. Maybe the other stranger brought it. I only know it was there, trembling under the table. The pale man grabbed it by one leg and dragged it out. The stranger at the table stood up then, and his voice was the opposite of the pale man's. It was deep, so deep it sounded like it came from under the earth. He shouted back at him. I heard words like "sons of hellfire" and "lords of gore." I do not know what it meant. I do not want to know. The deep-voiced man looked afraid, though. That was what chilled me most. He looked like a beaten dog that still had teeth but knew it was facing something worse. The pale man did not care about his words. He lunged at him, and the two of them crashed into each other. They did not fight like men. They bit. They clawed. They tore at each other with their hands and teeth. The table tipped over. The lamb was thrown across the room toward Nora's daughter. Blood went everywhere. More blood than I had ever seen in any fight. It sprayed on the walls, ran over the floor, and dotted the window glass in front of my face. I wanted to run, but my legs would not move. I just watched, frozen like a fool. Then Nora's daughter started crying. It was not loud at first, but somehow both men heard it through all that tearing and growling. They stopped at the same time and turned their heads toward her. I looked too. She was holding the lamb against her chest, and the knife she had taken was stuck deep through her hand. I do not know if she had fallen on it or if the lamb had pushed it into her when it landed. She was shaking and crying, and her blood was running down the blade. The two men stared at her. For a moment, No one moved. Then the pale man shoved his long hand into the other stranger's mouth. I know how that sounds. I know you will read this and maybe think I am lying, but I am telling you what I saw. His fingers went in deep, and then he pulled. The other man's body shook. There was a wet cracking sound. The pale man pried the man's skull up and away from the rest of him, like he was opening a stuck jar. The deep voice stopped at once. The pale man held the head in his hands and looked into its eyes. Then his voice changed. It was still high, but calmer now, almost pleased. He said, "Just as their greatest sin is murder, I take joy in the killing of our own kind." Those words I remember clear. I will remember them if I live to be 100. Then he turned his head and looked straight at me through the window. "Mr. Dixon, I nearly died right there. I fell backward into the dirt. My breath left me. That thing could not be human." His face was covered in blood. His pale skin looked even whiter under it. His black hair was wet and dripping. Pieces of flesh clung to him. His eyes were not like a man's eyes. They were too bright, too empty, too knowing. He had seen me the whole time. I know that now.